Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Questions About Music. Questions About Music is the colloquium series of the music department here at the UofA. And as any colloquium series, we have guests joining us from very close by and very far. I'm introducing my guest in a second. But just to give you a sense, something that we do differently from other colloquium series is that we don't ask for formal paper presentations, but we have conversation with the people that we invite to share their knowledge, their insights, their performance experience. And this is a platform really for composers, performers, academics, people interested in all corners of music studies, from musicologists to ethnomusicologists, popular music and media studies, and much more. And we also do this. We have this platform for people that have things that are curious about that are connecting with music. So if there are people in the audience or after that have things that would like to see in this platform, people that you'd like us to invite and question, this is a perfect time to get in touch. There's also the email questionsaboutmusic@ualberta.com if you want to suggest topics for next year's. We'll have another of these sessions in April with Jill Rogers talking about trauma studies and music. But then let's say that the calendar is still open for what's happening next year, and we very much accept suggestions. But here now, my name is Fabio Morabito. I am a musicologist here at the UofA. And I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Shantz, who is a professor of choral conducting and director of choral activities, and by Michael Ostrzyga, who is joining us remotely from Germany, where he's right now around 9 p.m. So he probably has had already kind of like dinner and maybe a couple of beers. But we really wanted to have Michael with us today because he's one of the people perfectly placed to have a conversation with us about the topic of today, which is how to handle music that Mozart left unfinished. Michael very recently completed Mozart Requiem, recomposed, provided a completion. We're going to talk about what that means and what that meant in a second, but it just published a new edition of Mozart Requiem for Bärenreiter 2022, and we want to go behind the scenes of what happened there. We want to ask what happened, what he did, how he did it, why. And my colleague Dr. Tim Shantz here is someone who's going to conduct Mozart Requiems.
I am, yes.
Yes, he is. But we try to do this with Questions About Music, this series that we try to align to big performance project in the department. And soon the madrigal singers, the concert choirs, and the University Symphony Orchestra are all going to collaborate in a performance of the Mozart Requiem.
Conducted by Petar Donjerski.
Thank you.
And I'm conducting another performance in Calgary just a week and a half, 2 weeks before. So.
Yeah, but even just choosing which edition to use for this performance has made us think about, well, that's a perfect question to ask about what Mozart score are we using for these performances. And so we invited an expert and we're having a conversation about that. So maybe perhaps I could sketch very briefly what's the issue here, why Mozart's Requiem is a fragment, before asking my guests to pitch in on what they did about that. But for those that are unfamiliar with it, Mozart Requiem remained a fragment in the sense that there is literally one movement of the Requiem where Mozart wrote just the first 8 bars, and that's it. Didn't finish the movement and didn't finish the Mass. So someone had to complete the Mass so that Constance Mozart, the widow, could actually get the money of the contract that Mozart has signed. So very simply, there needed to be 2-3 movements more for the Mass to be done. First of all, very, very soon after Mozart death, Constance is looking for people to do this job. But there's more. Even the movements that Mozart had written had not been written completely. There was only some parts written in the score. So the full orchestral version was not there. Let me give you an example. Maybe you know the movement Confutatis. Confutatis, confutatis, maledictis, maledictis, flammis, maledictis, flammis, adenem, tadam, tam. So basically Mozart wrote just this, the vocal parts, aside from the very characteristic part in the bass. So you may have heard this before, but if you look at Mozart autograph today, that's what he wrote in the autograph. Then someone else wrote the other parts that are still today in the same score that Mozart started. In this case, this was Joseph Eibler, a composer that started doing this work of completing the Mozart Requiem, but he didn't finish. At some point, Constanze had to find someone else, in this case, Süssmayr, to write, to complete, to actually redo the orchestration. Süssmayr, instead of working directly in Mozart scores, started from scratch, so there is another manuscript. And then Süssmayr wrote the missing movements as well. So there are these two kind of interventions that were required, the full orchestration and composing some movements from scratch.
It's a big group project.
It's a big project. Recently someone directed me to a Wikipedia page that lists the modern completions of Mozart Requiems, and there are more than 25 of them listed. So I want to ask our expert in the room, who is the author of one of these completions, why are there 25 modern completions of Mozart Requiem?
That is the big question. Since we have a historical completion, that's the major difference from, for example, the C minor Mass, where there isn't an historical completion. You know, Süssmayer's work has been criticized from early on and has been doubted from early on. Actually, even Mozart's original parts have been doubted from very early on. In the 20th century, there was, no, I have to start before that. When the Requiem was published, there was a tradition already to craft arrangements of pieces. Like for the Requiem, there was a version for string quartet, or there was a version for two pianos and harmonium. And when the Paris premiere happened in 1804, they made an entirely new arrangement, putting in different movements from other composers, taking out some movements, and also rewriting some instrumentations. So in the evolution of the piece, to recreate portions of it for special occasions is already there. And in the 20th century, there was the endeavor to correct Süssmayr. So in a way to stay as historical as possible, but still craft a new version based on Süssmayr's completion, which is more close, that is basically the effort, I think, the goal, which is more close to Mozart's writing. And you know, this is a holy cow, of course, and first of all, and secondly, there is not one version which everybody would agree upon. This is impossible. I guarantee you, if you can bring back Mozart from his grave and get him to complete it, there won't be a consensus about it being the completion by Mozart, even in based on his version. It's not possible.
Yeah.
Because the human experience is so, music, to listen to music is so personal.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why there are so many versions, because people try to analyze what Mozart did, I think, basically, and then try to offer their own solutions.
Yeah.
And since nobody can agree upon one of these solutions, there are still more versions presented, including my own.
which makes a lot of sense. No, thank you for this. Like, in a way, this aspect that there is not one single version, and you put it so well in your introduction, there is not one single version by one person of this piece, which I think is very illuminating. In a way, one could say almost the same about every piece of music, because if you think about how many hands, how many people collaborate, whether the author is aware of that or not, in every performance that we make of music. But this is particularly the case, and probably one of the reasons why Mozart Requiem is probably the most discussed unfinished piece in the choral repertoire. It's because people started debating this very early on. Süssmayr died in 1803, so there was almost no one to go back to and say, like, what did you actually do? Like, people tried, and there are some letters. He wrote a famous letter to Bridtkoff von Hertel in 1800. But later on, as the Mozart myth exploded, and Constanze Mozart kept wanting to sell this score to various people, Michael very brilliantly put it like this in his text. He said that she sold it 4 times all over because she had some debts, and also she wanted to make the most of this score. But people immediately, already in the 1820s, were starting doubting the authenticity of the piece, precisely because Constanze Mozart kept repeating that the piece was entirely authentic. So there was this confusion since the beginning, hence a lot of talk about it. Hence, one of the reasons why this piece is probably so talked about and mysterious. There is an aura, almost a romantic aura about what we don't know, and so people's imagination can fly around what it might have been. Did Constanze Mozart say the truth or not at all? Who is right and who is wrong? And this is perfectly encapsulated by a lot of people wanting to have a say about it, and precisely, and perhaps even wanted to say, like, oh, maybe I want to play the music in this way or in this other way. So I wanted to ask Tim, as a performer that faces this enormous amount of choice, what do you do, or what has been your experience so far? Like, do we have mostly in our ears Süssmayr's version, or that's not true, or you go to what are different concerts you find different versions? What are the normal expectations of the audience and of performers in dealing with Mozart's Requiem?
I think the normal expectation is that there's this Mozart Süssmayr version, and that it could be interesting to interact with a different version, but that's not to say that an audience who's attending knows either of them. I think there's some movements that are in the popular ear, whether they've been heard through film, but it's not a work that people know from beginning to end, but they actually do know the beginning and the end since they repeat. So there's this, I think, there's a fascination through some of the movements that have been used in popular media, and I think there's a fascination, but a lot of wonderful, wonderful music that people are drawn to. So then, in terms of choosing an edition, it goes back to maybe what you as a director might be familiar with, or what you'd prefer to stick with. But then there's also practicalities of, oh, well, we'd have to pay a lot of money to get a new edition. Yeah. For a lot of chorus societies, oh, well, we own the old Kalmus edition, that's what we're using. Yeah. Oh, well, obviously you have to invest in a new edition, you have to invest in the parts. So there's the practicalities of just deciding to take on another edition, because you cannot do 2 of these together. These, unlike some works where you could work with a couple different editions, you really have to be marrying these 2 together. Yeah. Between the orchestra and the chorus.
Of course, and thank you for saying that. In a way, the pick and choose is less ideal, in the sense that people have taken radically different approaches. So some people have taken Süssmayr orchestration completely out and rewrote it from scratch. Some other people have used some of Eibler orchestration, some of Süssmayr, really different approaches. And I'm going to ask Michael what he did, because it's so fascinating to think about this. But you know, what you just said also reminded me that not many people, even if they're familiar with, let's say, the movement that I badly sang at the beginning, but they're not necessarily familiar with the orchestration of the movement. They are familiar with the vocal parts, maybe with the bass parts that I mentioned as well, that is quite idiomatic, that is quite characteristic. But what the maybe the middle part is not necessarily what an audience focuses all the time. What do you think, Michael, about the orchestration of the middle parts, which is quite, when we talk about the movements that Mozart did write in a skeletal kind of fashion, do you think that the audience notices different orchestrations in your experience?
I don't know if it would be good if they notice, because in a way the orchestration needs to be tailored to what Mozart did, that when you don't notice a big difference, maybe you just have it right. But when you cross the line and it's too much in the foreground, because you overdo stuff, being very, very engaged to write good music, that could be a problem. I think more of the more recent completions try to just add material which probably Mozart would not have added. And there is an important aspect to this, which for my completion was very crucial. You know, we know how Mozart notated his music. He actually, when he crafted his music, there were two big steps. He did a few things before that, but when it came to write down the real piece, the first step was to write the main substance into the score. That's what we have in the Requiem from Dies Irae onward. And the second step would then be to write all the rest. And so we can compare in Mozart's creative process to what extent he added music from step 1 to step 2. And so that was, for me, was a guideline to not do much more than this and not do less than this. So there's sort of a narrow margin to which you have to hit when you really want to come close to Mozart, and that is the point. Yeah. I think that's not the point for all of the new completions which are presented today. But for the musicology ones, this certainly was the major goal.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you just mentioned, it is true. Some of these completions come from very different contingents of people. Some are more people that consider themselves musicologists, some other are choral conductors, some other are composers who take the challenge of seeing what could have Mozart done here, and sometimes they fall exactly in this, that it comes a bit of a more of a denser thing, as if they were being composerly challenged. It's like, I see Mozart did a lot of orchestration, and I think they are all different. He doesn't repeat, so let me not repeat, or let me not double parts and add much more, and it becomes, as you were saying, an orchestration that is much more evident. What do you think about orchestration, Tim?
I think it's fascinating, and so in Calgary, as I said, we're doing the Levin edition. So Robert Levin being also a performer, this edition, I'd say, would take a looser approach to the fragments in a way, and open up other possibilities. Michael's book, Fact and Fiction, really addresses some interesting things, and I've found this fascinating, of how Mozart would have really kept with proper tessitura through an entire work, and stuck with a right range, that maybe you exceeded the range once in a while with the voice, but it was for dramatic purpose. And there's this Amen fugue, which is a subject that gets into a bit more detail than some want to know, perhaps. But it's a fragment that we can connect with. There's disputing fragments of what could be used. But Levin's Amen fugue, I find it actually almost funny. It doesn't sound like Mozart to me, and it doesn't. As Michael said, it uses older style in the way it writes out the fugue, not modulating at all. I'll let him talk about that. But the point is that it goes actually to very high tessitura for the singers, and it jumps out as something that doesn't quite fit into the entire work. But I also think that that's okay. It's an okay place to live. But you have to realize what you're taking on, in that this is something that's different. It is in a way attempting to create an addition in the style. Yeah. But that is, I think, the version of that compared to a musicological perspective is really broaddening much further than some are comfortable with. Yeah.
Well, maybe
I can.
Yeah,
please. This is what Timothy just talked about. It brings up an important question. What are the criteria for us to evaluate a completion? And, if people feel, or a lot of people feel, this is Mozart, and a lot of people feel that about Levin's version. So, is this alone a criterion to say, yes, he succeeded? And I think the fascinating thing about Levin's edition is actually that in terms of how the musical text sticks to Mozart's musical text, it's quite far from what Mozart writes. Still, a lot of people think this is very close to it. And I don't mean it in an ironic way. It's just really a question how we perceive music. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And maybe what Levin's genius is here, that he somehow captured the essence for a lot of people, that this is the spirit of Mozart in this piece, and that this spirit for many, many people is without a question there. But when you look at the musical texts and read them, you see a lot of things which Mozart had never done. Yeah. And that's maybe the interesting ambiguity here, which is also a tricky thing in discussing these questions.
Of course. And I want to kind of continue this train of thought in a second, because I want to ask you how you went about doing this. But yes. I'm so glad that you are mentioning that people feel so differently about this. It becomes about feeling, about what you think Mozart is, and whether Mozart has one identity or a more processual identity that changes, which is something that, for example, Michael takes care of quite a bit. But I wanted, since you mentioned the sketches, I wanted to tell a little bit of romantic gossip.
Oh, great!
About them. So, because of course there was a moment in which Constanze Mozart was cornered and said, but actually Süssmayr has mentioned that these movements are not by Mozart. But she, of course, was trying to keep this together. So it's what if, say, I gave to Süssmayr some sketches that were on the desk when Mozart died, and then wouldn't that make the Requiem all authentic? And we, of course, don't know. We cannot verify. Michael, correct me at any point. You are the expert. We cannot verify if this really happened or not. But there is this sketch, this Amen fragment, which is in some sketches near the magic flute. Am I right? And which was around the time that he was thinking about the Requiem as well, of course. But there is also the fact that we don't know, the fact that there exists a sketch. Sometimes people do sketch something and they do absolutely nothing with it. And they change entirely. They make another sketch, which it might not be there for us to see. So, it's interesting to see what Constanze Mozart said, and how we think about authenticity. But also we should think about very practically about people changing their mind all the time. And I'm sure that Michael would tell you as well that sometimes Mozart changed his mind between the first phase of writing the score and the second. So there is a lot there that can change. Of course, it can also stay exactly the same, and it can be just completed. And so you can have a lot of insight, in fact, by comparing the two phases of Mozart writing the score. But Michael, I think this might be a wonderful moment for you to tell us a little bit more what you did? What is your approach different from some of these other editions that are out there?
Yeah, I'll do that in a second. I just want to comment on what you just said, Fabio. What I said about the two phases, actually there are more phases, and some of them happening before. And the Amen sketch is from a phase before that, when Mozart just made notes for himself.
Yeah.
When he wrote the fair copy, so the Mozart fragment, there's actually no changes happen from that onward.
Of course.
From this step to the next one in Mozart's creative process. So we can be sure about that, it's what is in the Mozart Requiem fragment, that's really written.
Yeah, definitely.
But the Amen fugue is another type of sketch which could be in there, but also he could have discarded.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a different type of writings preserved.
Yeah, in different moments, as you said, entirely. Yeah. But tell us about your edition.
Yes, sure. So my what I tried is to really take into account is what Mozart did right until when he started to write his Requiem. So I really analyzed all of the works we have by Mozart. So I tried to compose in a way forward to the point of when the Requiem had to be written. And then I took also the completions we have. We have the completion by Süssmayr, and we have incomplete completion, if that makes sense, by Eibler. And I took also these two pieces, and then I composed these completions backwards, and trying then to reach the middle, if you could say this. And in doing so, most importantly, I really consulted Mozart's works for every question multiple times. Then I also took into account the music theory of Mozart's time to understand the music. So there are teaching materials by Mozart, and there are also, we know which textbooks Mozart knew, and I also drew on them. And then the creative process, I already mentioned that, was also important for me, so that I could orientate to how much would Mozart add in the second run when writing the fair copy. And then maybe the last point is what you already touched upon. There are some statements in the letters, for example, and there are some we could try to figure out based on these statements. For example, if really there was instruction to Süssmayr by Mozart, because there's, for example, there is a report by Sophie Heibel, which was Mozart's, I think, sister-in-law is the term then? Yes, I think so. And she remembers that when in the night Mozart died, that she came into the house and there was Süssmayr at the bed, and that Mozart did give instruction and even dictated timpani rhythms. And on all of these statements, I also try to evaluate them and at least see to that they don't contradict what I was coming up with.
Yeah.
So that it's at least this. And what you said about all these reports, that's true. We have to keep in mind that all these statements about the Requiem were written down at the least 32 years after the fact. And if you remember, try to remember what you did 32 years ago, even if it was important, even if it was an important event. So speaking of the sketches, you know, so Constanze is speculating herself
Yeah.
30 years plus later
Yeah.
if there could have been some. So you can decide by yourself how true that might be.
Yeah. This was also a time, you know, we were talking about the early 19th century where Constanze and these people were talking about the authenticity of the Requiem in the first place. This was a time that there wasn't yet so much concern for authenticity or for authorship in the same way we think about it today. Maybe, you know, the debates around the Mozart Requiem might be, I don't want to say the first historically, because I don't believe in historical first, but certainly the debate around the Requiem did consolidate some of the concern around, you know, towards a culture that is more familiar to us about aspects of authenticity. But, you know, just to go back to what you said about your edition, Michael. So basically, you looked a lot at other music by Mozart. So this is my idea. But whereas other people have looked more at, you know, maybe their own completion, or they, you know, specifically Süssmayr or Eibler, or making a bit between the two. You have done work that it's outside the Requiem, looking out outside the Requiem for models. Is that?
That's correct. And I might want to add, I forgot, I also looked at models Mozart used, in particular by Bach and Handel. We know from the letters, that's here a lot of the things I explained come together. We know from the letters that Mozart admired music by Bach, especially fugues. We know from the letters that he wanted to use Bach's music as model for his church music. We know from Stadler's report of Mozart's workshop after Mozart died that there were studies Mozart did of Handel's music. So he made copies of Handel's music and crafted them into his own music. And from this we all know for sure that Bach and Handel were important models, firstly, and secondly, we know which pieces Mozart knew by Bach and Handel.
Yeah.
So that was for me a guideline to also use this, to also look in this particular pieces Mozart knew, and then to look if I can find similarities already in what Mozart had written, and then to somehow have sort of the same background, and then also seek out particular moments in special fugues, which I think would have been a very good fit in the Requiem for the Amen fugue, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe the last, maybe if I just want to add one thing, what I also did, of course, is to look in all the efforts my dear fellows and colleagues have presented, because all these early attempts at completion, I admire them very, very much. And of course, that was also important for me to appreciate them, to study them, analyze them, and learn from them.
Yeah.
So we are on the shoulders, of course, of all these important predecessors.
May I ask though, Michael? For me, that feels like a minefield. I mean, with all of these editions, how did you decide you wanted to take this on? It kept egging at you, I assume.
You know, the argument for myself was there is room, which so far in my mind is untouched, to get closer to Mozart's style, to Mozart's composition technique. And by that I mean that you can derive from his compositions certain criteria for different things, like the tessituras. I checked all the tessituras, and the tessituras, of course, are connected to the counterpoint, because how you layer the counterpoint is dependent on how the tessituras are in the parts. Yeah. And that's the problem, for example, with Levin's version. He layers them in a way that he goes on top of the tessitura all the time, which is more like late Beethoven.
Yeah.
And And that is just an example. I analyzed all the compositions by Mozart free from music theoretical dogmatism. You know, like there is a dominant, there is a tonic, there's a false relation. The false relation is a very good term to demonstrate music theoretical dogmatism, because it is, of course, it's a special relation, but it's not false. It's everywhere in the writing of Mozart.
No, I like this very much, and I wanted to go back to a couple of things that Michael said, because I want to make sure that we don't let those pass. First, thank you for saying that you are celebrating this tradition of other people completing the work of Mozart, because not many people would say the same. So this needs to be appreciated, and we need more of that in terms of musicologists being acknowledging the work in a positive and inclusive and constructive way. So thank you for that attitude. It's very much appreciated. I'm sure the performers and people in the room appreciate that too. But one thing that you said that I like your approach for two other reasons. One is that it feels like you wanted to have in the ears what Mozart might have had, which I find it fascinating. Is a more kind of like almost phenomenological way of completing Mozart's score through kind of like the experience of what might have been in their ears in the workshop, what kind of fugues by J.S. Bach he was working on. So I like that a lot. But also, I think something that we haven't stressed enough is that you also wrote your completion of the Requiem in a way that is not just one version. There are some movements in which you say, like, you could go with this movement or with this other version of the same movement. It's like a choose your own adventure Mozart Requiem. And so first of all, I wanted to ask you a little bit more, about this choose your own adventures. And, was this difficult to convince Bärenreiter to do it? Or were they very eager? Like, because sometimes what you say in the introduction, that this is no piece by one person and there is not one piece, there is Mozart Requiem, I think is very convincing to me. But I'm curious to see how much you had to fight to do something in print that is different. And then I'm going to ask Tim the choose your own adventure Requiem for a performer. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, great question, really great. For me, this is a very long evolution, I think, for everyone. You try to come up with first answers to small little questions, and this happens a million of times until you have some first draft of a movement like an aim and fugue, which was not there before, and then you still refine, go back to what you had, discard something you had, and so forth. And very early on, I knew that for some decisions, you couldn't really decide if it would be version A or B, which neither of them would be impossible, but both of them would be possible to the same degree. And this sometimes had to do with like the key disposition, because when there are repeating parts, they need to be sometimes in the same key, and this is not the case in Süssmayr. So that when you stick to Süssmayr, you have sometimes to change one of the segments because it's in the wrong key. But you could go the other way around and change the other section and keep the key from this one you discarded in the first version. That's basically what I did in the Sanctus Benedictus area, because for me there were very, very strong arguments for both solutions,
right,
including arguments that are not based on composition technique, but based on listening experience.
Yes,
which is very strong. The tradition of performing the piece is very strong, and I think when you are familiar with the piece, Timothy in the beginning talked about what is in the ear from the piece. Many people who know the music have the music very present. And for them, I think, for me as well, it's even harder to decide, is that really in Mozart style or is it not? Because you are just so used to it.
Yeah.
And that's really hard things. And then you ask me what Bärenreiter, or if it was hard to convince Bärenreiter. No, not at all. I have to say Bärenreiter was so supportive and so constructive. I could do so many changes during the process, and I never the best publishing house in the world. Sorry, everybody else. I'm not doing a commercial for Bärenreiter here, but
Not
the
yet.
way how they really, you know, they wanted the creative, the content was the basic thing they wanted to have correct, and wanted in a way that I am happy.
Yeah, excellent.
No matter how expensive, no matter how much time it cost. And I even had, long in the process, I had even an alternative version for the Lacrimosa. And as you can imagine, in the process, I also have multiple versions for the Amen, and I shortened then a lot of stages.
Yeah.
What just happened was that I shortened a segment here and here, and for Bärenreiter there was actually in the very first corrections we made, there was still an alternate for the Lacrimosa. I mean, for the Süßmeier Lacrimosa, not the Amen. And then I decided at some point to discard it, because then happened something that the arguments for the Süßmeier version for me became much more stronger, and I thought, okay, what I did is not better than what Süßmeier did.
Oh, I love this kind of like this showing the process, like even in what you ended up printing. How about a performer dealing with a choose your own adventure Requiem?
Well, I love it. I mean, we seriously considered this Bärenreiter edition for the university performance here, but chose to go with the war horse, you could call it. But I love this idea, and I think also it can create dialogue with the performers, so that we all get a better understanding of how we make choices or what choices we may make, and then how that's influenced through what we're given. So I mean, even just in talking about this Amen fugue, for those that don't know, the Lacrimosa is familiar to your ears, you know it. And then it ends in the Süßmeier with this plagal cadence, Amen, and it's over. And there's, it definitely was history at the time to have a fugato or a full fugue on those words. So extending that portion. So it's not just, doesn't just finish with long notes, done. And so that, this has been, quite, there's been a lot written and a lot of different versions of this. And that's what we're, that's just one little tiny portion here. But so to choose how one might finish that movement, and I love how you talk about how the Süßmeier was very compelling to you in the end. Yeah, this is really fascinating to me. And I the 11 different sighing motives are that creates in a way a conflict in my ear, but I also enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I enjoy it because it's sort of going against something else that you already know. And I don't think an audience always picks that up because they hear this consistency in that edition, but going back to those original sighing motives in the violins of the Süßmeier, I can completely understand that. Mm. Yeah. And the choose your own adventure, I want to ask Michael a question about this, because he also mentioned, of course, now we're just on the cusp of AI versions of this piece. So what are the possibilities if one could actually just come to a performance and maybe the performance is in a room and you just press something and then you can hear a different version of it, right? What are your thoughts on AI with this?
We are on the verge of really, as you all know, on a verge here, because AI will completely revolutionize how we work, how we have results. Mm-hmm. I think Fabio and Timothy and me, we are in a generation where we don't grow up with it, but all people growing up now can get results in dialogue with an AI. And I think it's the rule already for many people. And it will be the rule in the next generation for sure. And I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. There has been this huge Beethoven completion done by an AI, but this actually was not done by an AI. The AI crafted a lot of different possibilities, and some people decided this is the best. So it's not really the AI helped and assisted in presenting different possibilities. You know, I'm not sure. I'm sure that the AI will be very quickly be able to do a Requiem completion, a very good one, maybe a better one than a human being could do, maybe in 20 years, I'm not sure, in 30 years. Today, you know, today I'm much better than an AI is, and a lot of people are as well, not me. You know, there's been these Bach choral generators, AI based. You could put in a melody, and the generator gave you a Bach choral harmonization. And firstly, all humans in the room, all my colleagues were much faster, like 10 times faster in doing a better version. Yeah, and secondly, maybe another question about this is like you know, like that is the Matrix paradoxon. You know, in the Matrix film, there's this scene where this bad guy is eating the steak, and he says to this agent, "I don't want to know that this is not a real steak."
Yeah.
And this question is there's some term, I don't remember the term for it. There's some term for this basic question, and this what you asked, Tim, is along those lines.
I think the quote is I think he says ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Right. And so,
but maybe,
do we want to have a product crafted by a human being or not? That is maybe the question.
Yeah,
I would prefer it because I have grown up this way, but I don't know if it's right or wrong.
But maybe, you know,
what are your thoughts on it?
Maybe we can focus because what you said that you appreciate about these aspects of Michael approach, I think is really telling and evocative about the fact that everyone is a little bit of a collaborator or a co-author. I like the fact that in a way this is both a completion of Mozart's Requiem, very much of this post-structuralist time in which we live, but also maybe even closer to what in the late 18th century people would have cared about in handling a score, which in a way predated some of our concerns to do with authorship, copyright, authenticity, and so on and so forth. But people, it's 2:47, and this for me is the perfect moment to open the floor for questions to the people in the audience and also those who are joining the live stream. So questions for Michael, for Tim. Yes, there is Dylan.
I have a question for Michael. Michael, have you received any critiques for your own completion of the work, and how do you respond to those?
You said critique?
Yes.
Critiques? Yeah. Okay. Good question, Dylan. You know, from the process of doing my version was that I had performances very early on, and then still worked on the edition. And people came to me and said to me, "Oh, I like this," or "I like that." And that gave me the opportunity to still reconsider. And that was very important to me. So the end, what was printed by Bärenreiter already went through many runs of corrections in a way, where also musicians were helpful, like from the period orchestras who performed on the recording, which is out there. And also after the edition came out, there of course have been different reviews in magazines and so forth. And I'm happy that most of them are very positive, and there are some still not liking this or that, which is part of the game, of course. And also there is some critique, in my opinion, not justified. That's also okay. And I think that's just the way life goes. You have to you give something to the world, and there are people when it is getting attention. Of course, that's a good thing, and that means also that it's being criticized.
Yeah. So there was Caleb.
Sure. Yeah. So another question from Michael. I'm curious to know what you found most challenging and the easiest in the orchestration specifically. So thinking about Mozart or Bach or Handel, I don't know, it strikes me where performer and composer sort of map onto each other. So that Mozart, first and foremost, was he a keyboardist or a violinist? We've maybe thrown some tomatoes at Robert Levin's edition, but Bob Levin absolutely is a keyboardist first and foremost. And I wonder how much that plays into the writing, not only historically, but now when you're making an edition.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yes, I think that Mozart is beyond everyone for sure. Probably has a very high intelligence. Nobody of us has, and you can see this in his scores, and also see this from that people testified that he could remember pieces by just hearing them once. There's this anecdote that he listened to a piece in, the Miserere and could write it down by memory. There is certainly much truth to this. And he could configure in his head this Handel piece and this Bach piece, and then put it into his own fugue ideas and so forth very easily. And we can do it maybe also, but at least I need maybe 10 times longer than Mozart did, and I need all the scores to have there. But you asked what was the most difficult thing and what about the instrumentation. I think the practical aspect is very, very important. I think not only the practical aspect to play music, but to have experience in writing music which is performed. I think that's, with all due respect to my colleagues, that a lot of people starting out doing these first editions didn't have experience in writing music which was performed. Like Richard Maunder, also Levin. They never composed a piece actually, or did a professional orchestration for an orchestra to perform on a day-to-day level, you know what I mean? And that is a different experience. Like Mozart did this all of his life, in every week there was one learning effect he gained from having something written and having and being able to listen to it and then to process it and then do it again. And all this experience in writing music, I think that is very, very important. And for the instrumentation, that was for me, I think, the rather easy part, because there's so much of substance by Mozart himself. So in the score, there's already all the voices and the bass line, and there's so many scores you could refer to. The most difficult thing for me was to craft the new movements, especially the new movements where Süssmayr did also write something. Like the Amen, in a way, you didn't have to evaluate Süssmayr material.
Because there wasn't one.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And for the Benedictus was, for me, maybe one of the hardest things, because everybody knows it. And it's a beautiful piece, but the structure of it is completely un-Mozartian. And to mess with this is really, really, really dangerous, because everybody will say, no, this is not right. Even if you are right. But yeah, maybe does this answer the question a bit?
Yeah, for sure. Other questions?
We can still take it, but this just goes again to the Benedictus movement, Michael. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how transparent you made the orchestration in that movement. How did you work with instruments in that movement, with solo voices?
There's a certain tradition in the church music in particular, but in vocal ensemble music also. You know, this is a certain type of music. It's not choral. It's soloistic ensemble. And there are many sections or movements for this in the operas and also in the church music. And there's sort of a basic pattern, and there are certain basic models how Mozart uses the strings, for example, in these movements. And there is actually hardly any real strict color part writing in Mozart. But then there's also not the difference of it. Like there's every time a lot of stuff going on in some instrumentation. So this is again the ideal line you have to find. And basically the woodwind parts here, there are a lot of models in Mozart's Handel arrangements. Mozart did these Handel orchestrations. And there are some of the movements which have a very similar instrumentation than a Benedictus. And then there's this concert aria, which, what is I don't remember the title. There's a concert aria for 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, and strings and sopran solo. So basically the same setting than the Benedictus.
And the Requiem,
yeah. We know for sure that the trombones wouldn't have played. They never did in a soloistic ensemble music. At least not doubling the solos. And also the trumpets and timpani very likely wouldn't have played. So that is what Süssmayr very likely did not in the way Mozart would have done, because he wrote all this.
The trombone students here just were upset about that, but they need to know it's only for
I'm sorry.
It's only that solo movement we're talking about.
Because of the wise, incredible trombone part.
It is. There's a lot for the trombones in this piece. And,
the trombones are great, and from the very beginning they are fantastic. The very first 4 notes, great, brilliant.
Yeah.
But not the Benedictus.
Any other question from Michael before we thank him and we invite everyone to join us for a glass of wine? Yes, please.
Like, we sort of think about it, well, what would Mozart have done? But it was like, what would Mozart have done when? Like, he'd come back and finished it when he was 45 or 55. What if, before or after that really annoying summer where Ludwig van Beethoven insisted on them spending all that time together and just wouldn't go away,
I'm sorry, I did not really get this.
You think of it as sort of crystallized.
Yeah. Well, the question Naomi is asking is, of course, it's Mozart as we know, but if he would have lived another 10 years, it would have been a different Mozart, or another 10, or the life experiences that he had. So, which Mozart are we using,
That's a very good question, and that is also something I address in my book. In my opinion, the Mozart Requiem could have only be completed by Mozart in that time, and that is like the end of 1971. And you are absolutely right. I think 10 years later, if you would present him the fragment 10 years later, he would have written a different Mozart Requiem. Sure.
Yeah.
And I tried to hit this time window. My purpose was, I know it's impossible. It's impossible, completely impossible. It's an air castle, really. But still, my purpose was to nail the style of Mozart in October, November 1971.
Yeah.
1791.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I know it's so impossible, but still, that was my... Yeah.
How romantic that it's impossible.
Yeah.
Any final question from Michael? Feel no pressure to be in the last one, but otherwise I think we should thank him for having joined us. By now it's probably 10 p.m. You're ready for bed, but thank you so much for such an engaging conversation and for joining us from the other side of the world. Can we give an applause to Michael?
Yeah.
And thank you, of course, to Tim and for all of you joining and asking questions. And please be our guest for the wine reception. Thank you again.
I just want to say thank you from here. Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure. Thanks for your very, very smart questions also. And I'm really, really sorry and feel very bad that I can't be there for the wine.
Yeah. Well, we can, put the video camera close to the wine for you.
Yeah. We make a prost on, for you. We make a cheers on you.
We'll have to have you here sometime.
Exactly, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thank you.
We good?
Okay, then I say goodbye. Okay, yeah.
Ja, Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Auf
Dankeschön.
Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.
Schlaf gut.
Ciao.
Yeah. He's great, isn't he?
Yeah,
I knew you'd enjoy chatting with him.
Yeah.
And he's,
he really is, like, he's an organist, he's a composer, he's
Yeah.
a musicologist. I mean, it's just